Welcome to this webinar powered by InnoFlow with the topic, What Matters in Talent Acquisition in 2022. My name is Caroline Hart Sehested and I have the pleasure of being the host for this webinar. I'm the founder and CEO of Futuretalent.dk, who is helping companies to attract, develop and retain the best talent. You may also have seen me as the host of TEDx Copenhagen, Future of Work. Today's topic is very relevant and The Economist and many other publications are referring to 2022 as the year of the worker, giving the employees more bargaining power than they have had for many years. Because of the scarcity of workforce that we are seeing today with the lowest unemployment rate we have seen in a decade, many companies are actually struggling to find and hire the right talent. So in this webinar, we are very excited to talk about and address how companies can actually improve how they attract and how they hire the best talent for the company. With me today, I have Jakob Wolter, who is the Director of Talent Acquisition in the pharmaceutical company, Pharma. Jakob is also known as a person who is always exploring new solutions and challenging status quo around the dynamics between technology, people, efficiency and quality. I would actually say that Jakob, you are some kind of a talent acquisition pioneer by heart, because prior to Pharma you have been working in Novo Nordisk for quite some years and have also been responsible for the talent acquisitions activities as head of talent acquisition in the headquarters in Denmark, but also in India. And that's also where I've had the pleasure of working with you. And so with that introduction, I'm really happy to have you with me today in the webinar, Jakob. And I think it would be nice also for you listening in just to have a short description or definition of what talent acquisition actually is and why it has been so important for you to work with this topic for quite some decades now.
Yeah, sure. So talent acquisition is the HR discipline of attracting and selecting new employees. And it's becoming more and more interesting. I think back when I started touching on this, I did something else before. This was just a matter of, reading some CVs, finding out, who fits, and then, we operationally just select someone.
Yeah.
It's definitely developed since then. It's not as simple as that anymore, and that's also why we're talking today, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, this requires a little more focus than I think we ever imagined there 10 years ago or 5 years ago, where things started moving in a new direction. So that's what I'm working with.
And so when you talk about the talent acquisition, you've obviously mentioned now that it has changed, but what are the most, you can say, important parts or elements for talking about recruitment, which is a big part of talent acquisition in companies today? What is it that they need to be aware of in these times of scarcity of workforce?
Yeah, exactly, and you mentioned it a little bit yourself. So we are in a situation right now where the power balance is shifting. So back in the days, there was a lot of applicants for different kinds of jobs, and as an employer, you could sit there, behind the table and choose between this fantastic candidate or that fantastic candidate, and you can have a dialogue about that. You still do that to an extent, but it's definitely shifting. So right now, it's way more the candidates selecting the companies than it's the companies selecting the candidates. And to be honest, I think it's a healthy development. It's been a little bit unbalanced, and it forces a lot of companies to think right now. So how do we look?
Yeah.
What are we actually offering? What's the value proposition that we are delivering as an experience, and maybe more than a place to work?
Yeah.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think there's plenty of opportunity for a lot of companies, especially in Denmark, to revisit this and say, why should anyone work for us?
Yeah. And so where do you see the main headache or the main struggles, and how do you see companies overcoming that? What are the learnings that you have gained in Novo Nordisk, but also what you're working on right now in Leo Pharma?
Many struggles. I think the primary one is that things are moving faster right now. So all the processes that we're used to running in a certain way, and talent acquisition has been very old school for a long time, and you do these steps and then you wind up with a candidate. It's being challenged right now because candidates, if you have 3, 4, 5 offers on the table, and many have these days, you know, if you wait a couple of weeks because the hiring manager is on vacation, you don't have a candidate anymore.
You lose the good ones.
And I think that forces a lot of flexibility into these processes, and a lot of these steps have to be skipped, and you have to pounce on the great candidate when they're there, which speaks back to the whole idea of a good candidate experience. What are they actually looking for? And that's also different. So you'll have some candidates who are just looking to get a job as fast as possible. You have other candidates that are shopping around, trying to learn about the companies. There's a lot of dialogue going on. Maybe they are actually the ones now, you know, postponing a little bit, coming back a week later, and so forth, like you know, we used to see companies doing. It's an interesting dynamic, and I don't think we have actually found the right solutions yet. There's also a lot of related dynamics to that. So for instance, we see that a lot more segments of candidates are expected to be, you know, pushed on the shoulder a little bit, and you know, don't want to put in applications for jobs.
Are they becoming more lazy, or what's going on? I mean, the bargaining power as
I think it's connected. I mean, Denmark is one of the countries in the world with most LinkedIn penetration. So it simply means almost a lot of people are on LinkedIn, and when you start seeing that there's a steady flow of people reaching out to you, offering you opportunities, it's a little bit, why should I go and find those opportunities myself? They are finding me. And I think we're seeing that in more and more corners, which in turn then drives to more functions like mine, where you have to do something pretty organized and with a lot of proactive outreach to find these candidates now.
But then does that organized recruitment process, does that work with the market that we are in right now, or? It
kind of have to. So to an extent, you will have to have a process that gives some sort of continuity, both for the hiring managers they can't live with things being different every time, and busy days, and we now kind of have to have a process for how to do stuff. We also have opinions, right? I mean, we don't want to accept crappy processes in a corner. We need to lift the bar at least to a point. So I would say like 70-80% kind of have to be pretty organized. And then you can discuss how to organize it. Maybe we need to challenge that. But the last 20-30%, you have to be creative there. And I think that's the real shift. I think back when we worked at Novo Nordisk, I mean, 95% of our positions were run in the same way. A lot of candidates coming in. It was fine, and we landed a lot of people that way. I think they have a brand that can still make them do that, but they're also seeing a push towards this. And I think we'll see much more. We have to think differently in this corner. These guys are not responding. These guys want something else. We need to think about that, and a lot more strategic work.
But do you think that this time we're facing right now will kind of force that disruption that might be needed to change the form as we know it, where people send a CV and a cover letter, and because I've seen also what you're doing in Leo Pharma with you inspiring candidates to see videos instead of job ads and stuff like that. But what are some of the tactics or things that you can do differently to give another candidate experience? Because you need to compete against the other workplaces. So how do you stand out?
I think it's a really good question, and I think it's something to be explored. I haven't seen a golden bullet anywhere. People are doing different things. There's definitely a move towards simply removing the CV. We know for a fact that it's not very telling in terms of predicting future performance. So it's also a little bit of a remnant from the past in a sense. It's also efficient way of selecting someone. and we don't really have a good alternative yet. There's a lot of push towards let's do cases instead.
Yeah.
Right? An actual let's try out something from the what that person is supposed to be doing. Let's do that instead. But it's super time consuming, and if you have a lot of different roles, I think in Leo Pharma we do 1,000 hires a year. Doing actually relevant cases for all of these different kinds of roles is a little bit of work. So I think we need something in between. And I'm sure there's a market for the ones that come up with how to do that in a good way. Definitely what I think we will see is more automated matching. So that you would see let's say offers where you can latch on to someone who will say, I can let you know when a relevant candidate is suddenly interested in doing something new. And I think those kind of machines are also already a little bit in play in different ways, but I think we'll see more of that, especially with the time pressure coming in. We need to know real fast if this biostatistics guru is suddenly available on the market, and I want to be part of wooing that candidate, can I say. And right now there's an information gap back and forth.
But I guess you have also been forced to kind of evaluate your selecting criteria. We discussed also earlier on how much focus we should put on experience versus potential to kind of expand your pool of finding the candidates, because I mean previously, at least also in Novo Nordisk, we had huge candidate pools and people applying for specific jobs, and I just hear from a lot of people now that they can select between a half full where it's only like one or two that are really good if they're lucky. So how do you kind of expand the pipeline you're choosing from?
It's interesting, and I think it's back to the whole dynamics right now. So we know for a fact that there are 40% more jobs available right now than normally, which means that in total there's just fewer candidates to go around. It's actually roughly the same amount of candidates available, but it's still, you have to spread that across a little thinner. And that means that you are in competition now. I mean, you can't just rely on it, and that goes back to the whole story about why are you more interesting than your competition. You need to be super crisp on that. And I mean, in Leo Pharma, we're trying to sort that out. So it's a very dynamic company, and right now trying to change a lot. They are changing strategy, want to go on the stock exchange. There's a million things going on, which means that the whole offer will also change. And we need to find out, and that's my responsibility to find out together with management. What are we supposed to be? What kind of company should we be, and what kind of employees do we want to fit into that vision? Because without that, you're just offering some work and some money, and that's not enough anymore. It really isn't.
And I hear that salary competition or salary war is just sky-rising right now, and I also hear that there's a lot of recruitments that are based on expectations that are not what happens in real life, so that a lot of companies are actually also losing candidates within 3-6 months, a year, because it was not what they expected. So how do you as a company align those expectations, knowing that other companies are offering better benefits or another culture or whatever it is? How do you make sure that it's the right match? You talked a little bit about the dating game also.
And I think I like to compare talent acquisition a little bit with dating, because you kind of have to be in it, both parties, for long term. And until you find a match, I mean, it's fair to start shopping somewhere else. And I think that exercise is quite similar. From my point of view, this is much more about starting to think differently as companies. We cannot think about employees as someone who is there to do a transactional piece of work and then get money for it and go home and have a life. You kind of have to be part of that experience now. There's a lot of talk about changing all of HR to be a little bit more about employee experience.
Yeah.
Generators in a sense.
Yeah.
And that's probably your competitive edge, because you might be in a situation where you cannot offer the same salaries, but if you offer a better experience right now, and it's much more fun to go to work at your place rather than someone else's, I think you have a reasonable chance anyway. Making that visible to the world is a challenge. Yeah. But your employees, your existing employees, should also be an advocate there you could use. Yeah. But I think that's a huge challenge, and figuring out what it is probably the starting point.
And how do you prioritize that? Because there's a lot of things you can do when we talk about employer branding and talent acquisitions. You can focus your resources on digital campaigning or face-to-face activities, meeting the candidates at different events. Where do you see putting the money in the best bucket? Where do you start if you are to prioritize a couple of activities to build a good first meeting with a candidate?
To be honest, I think the starting point, at least for Leo Pharma, is with the top management starting to talk about what they want to do with the company. That goes both internally, but also externally. I mean, we have a new CEO came in spring, in April. It's time soon to start explaining what are we supposed to be, and that story is interesting for everybody, candidates, employees. We need to get that in order. When that is placed, there's a lot of tactics you can use, and I think for me, and that goes back to what you started to introduce me about. I mean, I'm very much about piloting and learning, finding out what works. Is it small videos from each areas that we start publishing? Is it our sources that go out to find candidates? Are we dressing them correctly? What kind of stories are they telling about the company? When they get questions back about the culture, what are we saying then? And so forth. All of that has to be aligned, and we need to tell the same story that actually has to be true. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. And I think that's the real trick here. There's no more hiding as a old school, half crabby company. I think you're in trouble. You need to think about, how are we making everybody happy? Why is it the most fun place to be? And if you can't say yes to that question and you're just, doing work, it's going to be super tough.
And I know that there's a lot of pressure from the organization towards talent acquisition because they need people. So how do recruiters sitting out there and hiring managers, how do they ensure that the candidate experience is so good that the people or the future employees decide to work with the company? What is the intention that needs to be in this?
It's many things. I think the primary thing, to be honest, it's super boring. It's about being super professional and timely and making sure that nobody feels forgotten, that there's no big gaps where we don't know who's doing what. To be in constant dialogue with these candidates and make sure they know they can live with, there are other candidates in play. We need to interview them as well. That they would expect that. That's not a problem. The problem is if you waited 2 weeks and they haven't heard from you, then they think they're out and you're gone. And I think in talent acquisition, we can tend to be super, super busy and things fall in between chairs. I think it's a lot about how much you invest in this, because there's a limit to how much you can run with this as a recruiter and maintain your professionalism.
And what's that limit? Do you have experience one? I mean, there are no recruitments that are the same.
No, exactly. I think it depends a little bit. So if you are doing difficult R&D roles, you will hopefully have less roles to handle than you do in let's say, production, where there's a lot more repeat stuff. I think in general, I would be concerned when my recruiters have more than 20 roles at a time. Then it becomes difficult to fit in. Also because there's a lot of stuff here that you can't do in the evening. I mean, it's not like you just do an interview at 10 in the evening with a candidate and a hiring manager. That really doesn't work. And I think back to the experience, right? I think we need to make sure that there's a decent balance of of workload. I mean, I used to compare this a little bit with, if you need to carry a lot of rocks across a road, there's a good amount to take on each trip. I mean, if you, and there's an actual meaningful amount that will make it most efficient. I don't know how much that is. Depends on how strong you are and how many, how much they weigh. But I mean, if you take too many, it will go really slow. If you take too few, it will go really slow. And I think it's a little bit the same here. You need to find that balance, and probably, needs to be tied to the organization and a little bit on what you're trying to do. If you're doing a lot of IT, it's really hard these days.
And I know, Jakob, that you're very focused on, continuously improving the talent acquisition processes and also looking into the techie part of it. Where do you see that functions as talent acquisition can get help from a more technical point of view, or are there something that you can outsource, or how can you streamline and use your resources the right way?
I think it's still a good question. Again, there's alarmingly few plug-and-play good examples that you can just go and buy from the shelf, and then we'll make everybody more efficient. It's a little bit sad because we've been talking about this for a while. There are some good options out there for different stuff. So if you have a large volume of recruitments like we do, you would probably want to figure out how we do scheduling efficiently. Right. Obvious
Is that the
place.
most time-consuming?
I don't think so, but it's definitely time-consuming, and you need a lot of that, right? So if we do 1,000 hires, we're scheduling, let's say, 5,000 interviews a year. If you can get that to be a 5-minute exercise instead of a 20-minute exercise, I mean, that's already nice, and it's a little more fun to be the admin that actually does that, to be honest. I think there's also there's potential in some different tools in order to do some more automated sourcing, to help find candidates, and maybe also pipeline a little bit. Pipelining is also an interesting stuff. It's typically something that my boss's boss and so forth will ask for. Let's do a strong pipeline of candidates. And pipelining is roughly dead, in my opinion.
Why is that?
Because candidates disappear, so they get new jobs, and then they don't want to move again. So you might have a nice list of great candidates, but
again,
they're available in 3 years. So it's very much about being much more agile in the moment, and also making sure that when you have a good candidate, that you're able to actually hire them fast. I think you can do pipelines in two scenarios. You can do it when you have so much volume of a role, so you can always have an open position, and that means that you can hire anyone you find. You can also do it when you, in the other end of the scale, when you have so much difficulty hiring niche roles in the corner that the business is ready to open a position for that person if you find one. Everything in between, I wouldn't do it. Not yet.
But that really requires some changes in the organization to have that. Another thing I would like to get your insights on, Jakob, is I mean, we all know how important diversity is and what it can, how much value it can bring to an organization. So what are your experiences in bringing more diversity in through recruitment and talent acquisition? And has that changed in the market that we are in now? Can we allow ourselves to focus on diversity, knowing that we don't have the same access to talent?
It's a good question. There's definitely a different dynamic when you only have, let's say, 1 or 2 candidates to pick from, and it's unlikely you will find number 3. Then what are we doing, right? And I think that will drive some interesting behavior also on hiring managers. So the whole diversity challenge has been very much about, let's say, us challenging the business to, consider new kinds of candidates, be open to new, different parts of the candidate pool that we didn't used to do, avoid hiring a copy of the person that left, that kind of stuff. And that's been very much the talent acquisition role to say, have you considered this? Have you considered that? I'm not experiencing hiring managers having a lot of problem opening the books these days. I mean, they are very open because they know that it's going to be super difficult. So if you find a great person that can do it, I don't care about demographics.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, it's an interesting thing where for the last couple of years, it's been very much about how do we lift those groups that people are less interested in, or maybe have some bias against, or whatever it is, to now people being like, we don't care that much, to be honest. If you can find a great candidate, I'm super happy. It will put some pressure on a lot of organizations, because especially when you're a small country like ours in Denmark, and you have organizations that are very Danish. We are still seeing that issue in Pharma, absolutely. Then introducing a lot of different nationalities to the group is an interesting exercise, also from a culture perspective. So what are you driving, and what kind of a culture are we getting? My own team included. So we're building a European talent acquisition team right now. And it's 10 people with 8 different nationalities or something like that, which is fantastic from many points of view, but it's also very new. So we need to find, some common way of working together here, which is probably going to be very different than if I had 10 Danish recruiters in the team, right?
And it's even more difficult for you to hire recruiters and recruitment partners, because everyone wants those profiles right now.
Recruiters are right now the most sought after profile on the entire LinkedIn platform, more so than software engineers and so forth. So it's a weird, strange
That's really
exercise.
Crazy.
Yes, and back to the whole story, right? That it's connecting. That if you are in so much trouble getting good applicants for your roles, you will start building up organizations like mine to make sure that you can actually do something strategic with your talent acquisition, and it just doesn't become who's ever randomly available. That was the big fear, and why you need to think about this a little harder.
Is the problem really to finding the best talent, or is it to focus on retaining? And I know that we work together in Novo Nordisk with the graduate programs, ensuring that we could build talent pipelines for the future, and doing a lot of development activities around these early talents. And so, with your experience also working with graduate programs and early talent in general, how do you see the role of early talent, and why do you think that there's a pattern, seeing that a lot of early talents, they don't stay in the companies for so long as other profiles are doing?
I see a huge role for early talent. I think it's important that any company right now thinks about what are we longer term doing in terms of offering, and generations are not alike. They think differently. There's definitely a matter of being a company that can also progress your employees, and being a company that really puts some effort and some emphasis on being a place where you have a great experience, as we talked about, but also develop your career. And that's not necessarily everywhere, and it's a difficult thing to do, and it's a different task for a manager than just simply running the show. I think that's important.
What are the pros and cons, or what does it require for a company to have focus on early talent or graduate programs? How do you start?
It's a good question. I think you need to be present to some degree at the different universities and be an actual something right? And so you're an option in their mind. In Leo Pharma, we haven't been good enough at that, and we'll do something more there to start, establishing ourselves as someone you consider. And I think that's important, because longer term, you need to be on the radar. That said, then there's an actual program, and you can do those. I think graduate programs are an amazing thing, because not so much in terms of attracting that great candidate from Copenhagen University or CBS, because you can get those in other ways, and you can get them later in their career if you want to pay for that. But in terms of attracting strong external talent, graduate programs have proven to be super, super strong, because you offer something else than just a standard job. Back to the whole experience thing. If you can deliver a graduate program that truly makes it, a journey that can develop a person in itself, I think that's an amazing thing to consider, and that would actually give you access to a lot of external talent from all sorts of the world at a point where they're not super pricey and where they're looking to develop and looking to contribute and will come in with new perspectives to your company. And there's so many nice things. I don't know if you remember the actual Denmark versus non-Dane ratio in the Novo Nordisk graduate program. It was crazy. I don't remember the number, but it was...
I think it changed from like 13 years ago. It was 10% non-Danes and 90% Danes, and now the number has completely shifted the other way around. But I'm curious also to hear, how do you then screen or assess these early talents to really make sure that they then have the right mindset to stay in the company, if they are to stay in the company? I don't know if it's still a benefit, the whole build versus buy approach.
True, and there's that angle, right? So that we will see definitely a way bigger mix of just freelance people also being part of the mix, and you will see people with shorter tenure in their companies, again, because people are chasing different things than they used to do. Stability, I think you would find, is less on the list if you actually ask a lot of people right now, especially in this market where anyone can, I literally mean that. If you're good at something right now, it's not hard to get a job. You need to be good at something and be a half-decent person to work with, and then that's not a problem. So the whole drama of losing your job or not fitting in and so forth, it's not really that big of a deal as it used to be. I'm generalizing. I know that there are definitely corners where it's not the same, and I'm probably also talking private sector here, to be honest. But it drives a completely different dynamic, and I think we need to take that very seriously and make sure that, if we only have people for a couple of years, we need to find a way to make that an actual value gain anyway. And I think that's probably the biggest mind shift that says you will probably not see your people being here for 5-10 years anymore. And you need to make that a profitable thing for your company. There's also benefits of that, a shift of different new ideas and so forth. And it puts the pressure on talent acquisition, but also on your onboarding processes and making sure that people come up to speed. In general, just making sure that people have what they need real fast, and IT and a lot of other things. It has to work. If we're slow again, it's a problem.
So how do you future-proof your organization's workforce? What are the learnings from you that we need to take into the future in regards of safeguarding that we have the right people, not only today but also in future ahead?
It's probably less about actually safeguarding it, but more about making sure that you can replace people with quality when you need to, and make sure that you have the tools available. And when I say tools, I mean broadly the actual story, the actual good experience, right? The actual interesting job, an actual successful company, right? It's also important. All of these elements need to be in place. If you can do that, then people will naturally want to work for you because you're better than the competition, and you will be able to, rewards probably also part of that package, right? You need to be able to offer something that makes sense in terms of money. But I think it's about getting all those things in place. You want to be the company that people think Google is. I'm not sure they are. I don't know. But you want to be that company, right? That people say, oh, are you working for them? That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I think that's how you future-proof it. That doesn't mean that you won't have to recruit, because people will leave anyway, and find new things and want new opportunities that you probably can't give them or something like that. And I think that's part of the deal.
Yeah.
But if you have that kind of company, then you will also have great replacements, which is fine.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the mind shift we need to work with, that it's fine.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't need a turnover of 5% in a company and call that successful. We can probably live with 15 and then just, be good at shifting it. There's also a great benefit. So Leo Pharma right now, with all the changes that are happening there, every single organization is looking for a different kind of employee, maybe not different, but at least a very specific kind that they need in order to execute on their future strategy. That's super hard if you have a turnover of 3%.
Yeah.
I mean, then, well, how do you operate? How do you shift the way you work?
Yeah.
If you have a large turnover, you can definitely do that.
Yeah.
But you'll also be a little bit behind the curve if you're not fast.
Yeah.
So you'll be understaffed forever if you don't do something pretty organized. That's why they hired me. But we're building and we're trying, but it's definitely a nice ambition. And I think over a short period of years, we are likely to probably hire as many people as we have in the company right now in like 5, 6, 7 years. So doing that in a strategic, smart way is probably pretty important. If you end up, hiring the wrong people in that kind of amount, I mean, it's difficult.
Yeah. But you talked a little bit about, the perspectives in the gig economy, that companies will be forced to taking more freelancers and consultancy and stuff, consultants and people that are moving around in the market. How does that meet the requirements of the company now? Are the companies too locked in the way that they offer contract and how their working model looks like today, or how do you see that change, if it's changing?
I think companies are probably very different. I don't know, to be honest, and I'm sure that it's different industries have different angles here. It's in pharma, at least, there's actually been a strong tradition for using a lot of consultants for all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
I think the real change is when you are using them to actually operate your daily business and having that as part of your workforce plan, in a sense that you say it's actually smart if 20% is coming from the outside. How do we do that? There's a lot of nice, interesting new emerging platforms out there to find good freelancers and trying to execute on that in a good way. I think that's super interesting. It gives a different perspective to it, and consultants are also have a different attitude to what they're doing. They're only going to be there for a short time. They want to do a good job so they can recommend it next time, and I think that in itself drives just a different dynamic, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That can work really well. We just said goodbye to a great consultant in my team. She came in, saved us. I think she enjoyed saving us in that sense, and then she moved on to something else, and that can be a nice also employee experience for her. It definitely worked for us, and I think those kind of scenarios you should probably, as a leader, prepare yourself for. So how can we do some more quick solutions to some of these issues? Maybe having all of your team as in-house people is not part of the plan. We have an agreement with a big external recruitment process outsourcing company as well. That's a permanent plan, in my eyes at least, until someone tells me differently. But that means that I have an external partner that I can ask to scale up, scale down. We have agreements on how to work together. It's great. And I still treat these people as my own team. So we're flying everybody in September, including the externals. And you can totally do that. I think that works fine. And it just gives a different perspective because they can do different things than we can. We can put people in different places that we can't because we're not there. Legal entities are not necessary, all of them, right? So right now I have an employee that's external that sits in Croatia. I don't think Leo Pharma has a legal entity in Croatia. I think that's a problem if I actually had to have that person in my, So there's different things there, and I can scale up somewhere strange.
Yeah.
Because really fast.
That I think is a really good advice or something to think about, because I think it's really challenging to have a TA function, because the needs of the organization changed all the time. You can have a month where you need to recruit 5, and then the next month you need to recruit 100. So what are your advices on how do you make your TA function flexible or scalable in regards of the demands of the hiring managers and the...
I mean, in reality, there are 3 options. You can go full in-house, which is fine, and you hire a lot of people, and then you have them. It's really hard to scale it. Every time you need to go to a finance person to get a new headcount and all that stuff, especially in big organizations, that's super annoying. So you can do that. If you don't have a lot of fluctuations in your volume, I think that's actually a pretty solid solution. It's probably the cheapest. Then you can go full external, where you simply say, someone else take care of my TA operations. A lot of companies are doing that. They are...
Don't you then? You talked about the culture and the employer brand. Isn't there a chance that you lose that?
There's a real risk, and I mean it depends on the provider and the agreements you make with them. But there's a real risk that you lose the connection to the business, that it just becomes a transactional, let's close a lot of recruitments situation, because that's what we're hired to do, and less about, are we getting the right people on board? Do they match with the strategy and so forth? In my team, we have opted for a hybrid. So we get the flexibility of the external, but we have half the team is internal. And that means that I now have experts in every country where we have a big presence. So I have someone who can take care of France. We have a big factory in France. If they do want to do something new, if they want to automate something and we need to do something on automation, I have someone that can take care of that and that understands them and can get a relationship with the management team there. All of that is easier with you have. So my recommendation is probably to look into that. I think that it seems like the best solution, to be honest, if you are, again, in a situation where you might see peaks and troughs, and usually you are. If you're a small company, get a strong in-house person that can take care of your thing. I would much rather do that than ask your managers to find out how to do recruitments on their own. I think a lot of companies are also doing that model.
Which is time-consuming if you're recruiting once a year.
And people have different skills in this area, right? You will have great hiring managers that know exactly how to talk to a candidate, and it's a great experience. And you will also have the other version. And as a company, I'm not sure you can afford that, to be honest, especially with the power shifting towards candidates. Every time they meet the annoying guy, it's a problem, right? And I think we probably want to be just a tad more professional as companies right now, and make sure that everybody has a good experience and not just the people meeting the nice guy.
Jakob, I feel we could talk for hours about this topic, and I definitely know that you're very passionate about continuously changing the way that we recruit and hire the best people for the company. So I want to say a big thank you to you, Jakob, for joining us on this podcast about how talent acquisition is important here in 2022. And I think what we discussed about today was definitely the importance of making sure that you have a company with a strong value proposition that everyone wants to be a part of. And then that will make the candidates line up, because right now the line is very short of potential candidates. We talked about the potential of automating the sourcing part, and we also talked about why sourcing is maybe even more important now than it has been before. We talked about making sure that you have a recruitment process, or that you have the opportunity to always replace, because we are in a different working market right now, where a candidate does not stay in the company for as many years as they maybe have done before. And for that, we also talked about early talent, recruiting early talent. How do you recruit the right early talent? What are they expecting could be satisfied in a graduate program, or at least some focus on developing their talents. And I think that we came around all elements of talent acquisition, not knowing what's in the future glass ball, but you definitely came up with some good advices on what we can expect going forward. And with that, I want to say a huge thank you to you, Jakob, for joining this webinar around why talent acquisition is so important in 2022. And I also want to make sure that now that we talked about diversity, that you all know that there's another webinar which is available on Spotify, YouTube, and the webpage of Innoflow around diversity, equity, and inclusion that is also very insightful for you to listen into. So thank you so much for joining, everyone, and all best, and thank you, Jakob.
Thank you.